This lesson is on 3.1, parallel lines and transversals. The essential question we have here is how can you describe angles formed by parallel lines and transversals? Now, what exactly is a transversal? Well, when an object is transverse, it is lying or extending across something. So our key idea here is we've got corresponding angles. When a transversal, which is our line T here, intersects parallel lines, corresponding angles are congruent. So let's look at an example here. Finding an angle measurement. We're going to use the figure to find the measure of angle 1 and the measure of angle 2. Now, looking here, it tells us the only angle that's given here is right here, this 110 degrees they have right here. Well, we can tell by looking at our two parallel lines, which is A and B, that our transversal T, the angle 1 is actually a corresponding angle to the angle that's labeled 110 degrees. Remember when we talked about corresponding? That just means that they match up and that they're the same. So our angle 1 is going to be 110 degrees because it's corresponding to the angle that we know. Now when we're looking at number 2 though, we know that angle 1 and angle 2 are actually what is called supplementary. Supplementary angles actually mean that if you add both angles together, you're going to get 180 degrees because, see, it makes a straight line. And a straight line is 180 degrees. So in order to find the measure of angle 2, we've got to know that angle 1 plus angle 2 is going to give us 180 degrees. Well, we already know that angle 1 is 110 degrees. We don't know what angle 2 is, but we know that it equals 180 degrees. So in order to find out angle 2, all we have to do is subtract that 110 degrees from both sides of our equation. And we're going to get that the measure of angle 2 is 70 degrees. So angle 1 is 110 degrees, angle 2 is 70 degrees. Okay, so when we have two parallel lines that are cut by a transversal, we have 4 interior, like inside, remember interior is inside, are formed on the inside of the parallel lines. And there are 4 exterior, like the outside of your house is the exterior. We have exterior angles that are formed on the outside of the parallel lines. So when we're looking at our parallel lines here, where P and Q are parallel and cut by the transversal T, we have angles number 3, 4, 5, and 6 are considered interior angles because, see, they're in between those two parallel lines. But angle 1, 2, 7, and 8 are considered exterior angles because they're outside of the two parallel lines. So let's look at example 2. Here we're going to use corresponding angles in the figure to find the measure of the different angles. So to start off with, we can look at this and see that angle 1 is what is called a vertical angle. In other words, it's right across from that 75 degrees. Well, vertical angles are congruent, meaning that they are equal to each other. So the measure of angle 1 is going to be 75 degrees, just like the angle that's given. Now, though, looking at angles 2 and 3, if you notice, angle 2 is going to be supplementary to that 75. In other words, you add them together to make a straight line. Same thing with angle 3. So in other words, to find the measure of angle 2 and 3, remember the measure of 2 plus 75 degrees is going to equal my 180. Subtract 75 from both sides, and we get the measure of angle 2 is 105 degrees. So the measure of angle 2 is 105. Well, that means that the measure of angle 3 is also 105 because it's also supplementary to angle 75. Plus, angle 2 and 3 are vertical angles, so that means they're congruent. So now we have the measure of angle 1, 2, and 3. So now we have to figure out what is 4, 5, and 6. Well, we can find this out by using corresponding angles. So if you notice here, you can look at angle 4 and notice that it corresponds with angle 1. So that means it's 75 degrees. Angle 5 corresponds with angle 2. So it's 105 degrees. Angle 6 corresponds with that angle that's labeled 75 degrees. Angle 7 corresponds with angle 3, which is 105 degrees. And so that would be all of them there. Just make sure you're paying attention to which ones correspond. Remember, correspond just means it kind of matches up to figure out which angles are what degrees. So let's look at another example here. In example 3, we're using corresponding angles. So we have a store owner uses pieces of tape to paint a window advertisement. The letters are slanted at an 80-degree angle. So what is the measure of angle 1? If you notice, if you're looking at these, you could see here that these tape are actually parallel lines. And these parallel lines are being cut by these two transversals. So now we have corresponding angles. So notice though that this 80 is going to correspond with this angle. So we know that angle is 80 degrees. But we notice that angle 1 is supplementary, meaning that it adds up with that angle that's labeled 80 degrees to make 180 degrees. So that means that angle 1 is actually 100 degrees. So the answer would be B. So our key idea here is that alternate interior angles and alternate exterior angles. When a transversal intersects parallel lines, alternate interior angles are congruent, and alternate exterior angles are congruent. Remember, alternate just means opposite. So we've got the alternate interior angles being congruent and the alternate exterior angles congruent. So let's look at a real-life example here. Identifying interior, exterior, and alternate exterior angles. This photo here shows a portion of an airport. It's wanting to know what are the relationships between each pair of angles. Okay, if we notice here we have angle 3, which is right there, and angle 6. Well, what kind of angles are these? These are considered alternate exterior angles. Alternate exterior angles. Because see, they're alternate, meaning they're opposite of each other, and they're both on the outside, which would be the exterior. How about angles 2 and 7? 2's right here, and 7's right here. Angle 2 and 7 are considered alternate interior angles. Because, see, they are opposite, but they're inside. They're inside the two parallel lines, so they are alternate interior angles. So go ahead, make sure your notes are finished up, bring them up for me to check, and get started on your Clever assignment.